My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 75 years old today, and if you saw me now, you probably wouldn't believe what I went through just 3 years ago. I'm here, sitting in the small apartment I managed to rent in Portland, Oregon, having my breakfast and looking out the window at the people rushing along the sidewalks, going to work, living their lives. But my story is not ordinary. At 72, I lost absolutely everything I had built over a lifetime, and I had to start over from scratch. For 45 years, I worked as an executive secretary at an accounting firm in Chicago. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I loved what I did. I organized the lives of important people, keeping everything running behind the scenes. My husband, Robert, was a hardware store manager. Together, we raised our 2 children, Patricia and Michael, in a modest home in a quiet suburb. We were always the kind of family that valued security above all else. We paid our bills on time, saved a little. Every month went to church on Sundays, no extravagances, no risks. When I retired at 65, we had our house paid off, a good retirement fund, and simple plans to travel a bit, visit the grandchildren, maybe buy that motorhome Robert always wanted. Life had that comfortable routine you build up over decades. Breakfasts on the porch, walks in the park, Thanksgiving dinners with the whole family gathered. I had my bridge groups, my book club, my friends from school. I thought I had it all planned, out until the end. But life, as I've learned the hard way, doesn't care about our plans. Robert died suddenly in 2020, during the pandemic, a sudden heart attack while watching the news. I couldn't even have a proper funeral because of the restrictions. It broke me in a way I didn't know was possible. 50 years together, and suddenly I was alone. Grief is a strange thing. You don't just lose the person, you lose the routine. You lose the future you had imagined. You lose a piece of yourself. I spent months in a fog, barely able to get out of bed. My children called, worried, but they had their own lives, their own families. Patricia lived in Boston, Michael in Los Angeles. I didn't want to be a burden. It was in this vulnerable state that I made my biggest mistake. A friend from church, someone we had trusted for years, convinced me to invest my savings in a guaranteed business. He painted a beautiful picture. High returns, total security, a way to secure my future and leave something for my grandchildren. I was so lost, so scared by the idea of running out of money that I didn't think straight. I signed the papers. I transferred practically everything we had saved. 6 months later, I discovered it was a scam. A sophisticated Ponzi scheme that deceived dozens of people in our community. The man disappeared with everyone's money. A lifetime's savings, 45 years of hard work, all evaporated overnight. When you lose everything at 72, people look at you differently. I see it in their eyes, pity mixed with judgment. How could she have been so naive? Poor thing at her age. As if I had instantly become an incompetent person just because someone deceived me. Financial reality hit hard and cruelly. My Social Security retirement barely covered basic expenses. The house, which I thought was secure, had a second mortgage that Robert had taken out without properly telling me, trying to help Michael with a business that went bankrupt. When I could no longer afford the payments, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. I tried to hide the situation from my children as much as possible. They already had their own problems. Patricia was going through a difficult divorce. Michael was struggling to keep his job during the pandemic cutbacks. How could I put more weight on their shoulders? But eventually, the truth comes out. When I received the final eviction notice, I had to call Patricia. I remember the shame burning on my face as I explained everything, the silence on the other end of the line. Then her tears. Then the anger, not at me, but at the situation, at the injustice of it all. "Mom, you can come live with me," she offered immediately. But I knew I couldn't. Her one-bedroom apartment in Boston was already cramped for her and her 12-year-old daughter. and honestly, something inside me refused to accept it. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the last spark of independence I had. "I'll figure something out," I said. I didn't know how, but I had to try. The day I left my house was one of the hardest days of my life. I had to hold a garage sale, selling decades of memories for a few dollars. The rocking chair where I rocked my children to sleep. The dinner set we received as a wedding gift. Robert's tools. Each item sold was like tearing away a piece of my history. In the end, I managed to raise about $3,000 from the sale and another $2,000 that I had, hidden in an emergency account. $5,000. That was all I had left in the world at 72 years old. I sat in the empty house last night, surrounded by a few boxes containing what little remained, and I made a choice. I could give up, become that poor old woman dependent on her children's charity. Or I could fight. One last time. I searched on my old laptop, which I almost sold but kept, for cities with a lower cost of living on the West Coast. I wanted to stay relatively close to Michael, but I needed a place where my limited money would last as long as possible. Portland emerged as an option. It had a decent public transportation system, more affordable rents than other major cities, and a community known for being welcoming. I bought a Greyhound bus ticket, a 42-hour trip from Chicago to Portland, but it only cost $150. I told Michael I was coming, but downplayed the seriousness of the situation. "I just want a change of scenery. Darling, a fresh start." When the bus left Chicago on that cold March morning in 2022, I looked back and watched the city where I'd spent my whole life disappear on the horizon. I cried. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of hope. Arriving in Portland was terrifying. I didn't know anyone. I had no job, no home. I only had my 5 boxes of belongings and an old backpack. I spent the first week in a cheap hostel, sharing a room with women decades younger who were traveling through the country. It was humiliating at first. There I was, a 72-year-old woman sleeping in a bunk bed, sharing a bathroom with strangers, keeping my purse under my pillow. But the girls at the hostel were surprisingly kind. One of them, a girl with pink hair named Riley, helped me create a Facebook profile and taught me how to use community groups to find cheap apartments. "You are brave, Mrs. Maggie," she told me one night. "I hope to have half your courage when I'm your age." Those words stayed with me. Maybe I was brave, or maybe I was just too stubborn to give up. I found a small studio in Gresham, an area further from the center, but the rent was $650 a month. It wasn't much, it was clean, and it had the essentials. It was unfurnished, so I slept on the floor for 2 weeks until I could buy a used mattress for $50. Money was running out fast. I needed a job, but who hires a 72-year-old woman with no local references? I went to dozens of places, supermarkets, retail stores, restaurants. The answer was always the same. "We'll keep your resume on file." Code for "No, thank you." Rejection hurts at any age, but when you're older, it carries an extra weight. You start to question your worth, your usefulness. I began to understand why so many older people simply give up. I was returning from yet another failed interview when I stopped at a small coffee shop called Morning Brew. Not to have coffee, I didn't have money to spend on that. But the bathroom was public and I needed to rest my feet. The owner, a Vietnamese-American woman in her 50s named Linda, noticed I looked exhausted. She offered me a complimentary coffee. I sat at the counter and, perhaps because I was so tired of carrying everything alone, I ended up telling her my story. Linda listened to me in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she said something that changed everything. "My mother arrived here from Vietnam at 68 years old, without speaking English, without anything. Today she is 89 and still works in the family restaurant. You have strength. I see that. I need someone to open the coffee shop at 5 in the morning, prepare the coffee, organize the tables. It pays $5 an hour, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Do you want it? I almost cried right there. $300 a week. It wasn't much, but added to my Social Security, it would be enough to survive. When do I start? I asked, hardly able to believe it. Tomorrow, if you can. And Maggie, she placed her hand on mine, everyone deserves a second chance, or a third, or a 10th. It doesn't matter how old you are. The first few months working at the cafeteria were tough. Waking up at 4 in the morning at 72 years old isn't easy. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. My back complained, my knees creaked. But I persevered. Linda was a wonderful boss, patient, understanding, but she also didn't treat me as if I were fragile. She demanded that I do my job properly, and I respected that. I didn't want pity, I wanted dignity. Regular customers started to recognize me. There was Tom, a truck driver who always ordered extra strong black coffee. Sarah, a night shift nurse who stopped by before going home. Mr. Chen, a retired Chinese immigrant who came every morning to read his newspaper. These people became my new community. They didn't know my full story, and I didn't tell them. To them, I was just Maggie, the kind lady who made excellent coffee and always had a smile in the morning. As the months went by, I managed to add some furniture to my apartment. A small table donated by a neighbor, a sofa bed I found on Craigslist for $100, dishes and pans from thrift stores. It wasn't the comfortable home I had in Chicago, but it was mine. I was managing. Linda had a policy of donating leftover bread and pastries at the end of the day to a local shelter. After a few months, she asked me if I could make the deliveries for her, since the shelter was on my way home. I agreed. That's how I met Helen, the coordinator of Hope for All, a shelter for homeless people. Helen was about 40 years old, with prematurely gray hair and tireless energy. When she learned that I was new in town and had free time in the afternoons, she invited me to volunteer. Many of the people here just need someone to listen to them, she explained. Someone who doesn't judge, someone who shows them that they still matter. I could do it. I started going 2 afternoons a week, then 3. I served soup, organized clothing donations, but mostly I talked. With veterans who struggled with PTSD and addictions, with single mothers who lost their jobs, with older men and women who, like me, had fallen through the cracks in the system. One afternoon, a woman named Joyce, who must have been about 65 years old, told me that she had been a teacher her whole life until health problems and medical debts left her homeless. I held her hand while she cried. "How do you keep going?" she asked me. "How do you not give up?" I thought about the question. "Because giving up is easy," I finally said. "And I didn't live 72 years to take the easy way out now, and neither did you." I realized at that moment that my story, my fall, and my struggle to rise again wasn't just about me. I could help other people see that starting over was possible, no matter the age, no matter how much you had lost. On my 73rd birthday, Linda threw a small surprise party at the coffee shop. Regular customers brought simple gifts, a woolen scarf, a crossword puzzle book, a $10 grocery gift certificate. It may seem like little, but to me it meant the world. It meant I had built something here. It meant I belonged. Sarah, the nurse, struck up a conversation that day. We discovered that we both loved knitting. She invited me to a group that met at the public library every Thursday evening. I hesitated at first. There was always that voice in my head saying that I didn't deserve moments of leisure, that I should be saving every penny, every minute. But Linda encouraged me. "Maggie, you deserve to have a life, not just an existence." The knitting group became my favorite part of the week. There were 8 of us women of varying ages sitting in a circle, knitting and chatting. We made blankets for premature babies in the hospital, caps for chemotherapy patients. work that mattered while we built true friendships. It was through this group that I learned about the free computer classes offered by the library. At 73, I decided it was time to improve my digital skills. I learned about spreadsheets, social media, and even how to make proper video calls to talk to my grandchildren. Patricia was surprised and emotional when I made our first proper video call. "Mom, you're using Zoom." We laughed together. I started talking to her and Michael weekly, showing them my small apartment, telling them about my work, my new friends. They were relieved to see that I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I don't want to paint a rosy picture. Life continued to be difficult. In the winter of my first year in Portland, I fell ill with a bad case of the flu that kept me bedridden for a week. No work, no pay. I panicked watching my small savings dwindle. Linda paid for my week anyway. "You'd come back to work sick and contaminate all the clients," she said when I tried to refuse. "This is practical, not charity." But I knew it was pure kindness. My knee started giving me serious problems, arthritis that I had ignored for years. The doctor recommended physical therapy, but my insurance barely covered it. Helen at the shelter connected me with a community clinic that offered mobile treatment. I paid $20 per session instead of $200. These experiences taught me something important about starting over. You can't do it alone. The American myth of the self-sufficient individual is just that, a myth. We all need help. We all need community. Accepting this is not weakness, it's wisdom. When I completed a year in Portland, I sat down to take stock of my life. He had a stable job he loved. He had a small but comfortable apartment. He had genuine friends. I had purpose through my volunteer work. He didn't have material wealth, probably never would again, but he had something more valuable: peace. I had also learned lessons I never would have learned in my previous comfortable life. I learned that resilience isn't about never falling, it's about getting up again from where you fell. I learned that community isn't just the people you've known for decades, but the people who show up for you in tough times. I learned that starting over isn't about recovering what you've lost, it's about building something new. Michael came to visit me that summer. He stayed on my sofa bed, jokingly complaining about my aching back. I took him to the coffee shop, to the shelter, introduced him to my friends. On the last day, while we waited for his Uber to the airport, he hugged me tightly. "Mom, I was so worried about you. I thought you were going to—" He paused, overcome with emotion. "Give up?" I finished. I thought about it too, but I discovered that I still had a fight left in me. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. "I'm proud of you." Those words meant more than any amount of money in the bank. In my second year in Portland, Helen asked me to start a support group at the shelter, specifically for seniors. There were more and more older people becoming homeless, many with stories similar to mine: widows deceived, pensions lost, families unable to help. Our group met every Monday afternoon. We started with just 3 people, but it grew to 12 regulars. We shared our stories, our struggles, but also practical resources: how to apply for SNAP, food stamps, where to find free medical clinics, which churches offered meals without requiring you to attend the service. But, most importantly, we offered each other hope. When Gerald, 68, got a part-time job at a library, we celebrated as if he'd won the lottery. When Dorothy, 71, finally got a subsidized apartment after 8 months on the waiting list, we all cried tears of joy. I realized that my experience, however painful it had been, had given me something valuable to offer: living proof that starting over was possible. I was the walking, breathing example that at 70, at 80, even at 90, it's not too late to build a new life. Today, at 75, I still wake up at 4 in the morning to open the coffee shop. My body still complains, but less so. Or maybe I've just gotten used to the discomfort. Linda gave me a raise last year, Now I earn $17 an hour. It seems like little, but for me it represents recognition and respect. My apartment is still small. I still buy most of my clothes at thrift stores. I still count every dollar. But I've also managed to save a small emergency fund, $1,000 that I religiously save, reminding myself of the vulnerability of having nothing. My grandchildren visit me now, staying in my little space, enchanted by the adventure of sleeping in sleeping bags on Grandma's floor. Patricia came last Christmas and was shocked to see how I had built a life here. "Mom, you're really happy," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I am," I replied honestly. "Not in the way I planned, not in the way I imagined, but yes, I am happy." Happiness at my age, I've discovered, doesn't come from financial security or material comfort, although those things help. It comes from waking up with purpose. It comes from knowing you matter to someone. It comes from looking in the mirror and respecting the person looking back. If I could sit down with Maggie from 3 years ago, that devastated woman leaving Chicago on a Greyhound bus, I would say a few things. First, loss, however total it may seem, does not define you. You are not your possessions, your bank account, or your house. You are your courage, your kindness, your refusal to give up. Secondly, it's never too late to start over. Society might say that at 70, you should be peacefully retired, waiting for the end. But there is life, truly vibrant life, available at any age if you have the courage to pursue it. Third, pride can be your worst enemy. I almost never asked for help, almost never accepted the kindness of strangers because I thought I should be able to do everything on my own. But it is in our vulnerability, in our willingness to accept help, that we find true humanity. Fourth, community is not optional. It's essential. We cannot survive alone, much less thrive. The people who helped me, Linda, Helen, my friends from the knitting group, the customers at the coffee shop, they all became my chosen family. Fifth, purpose is more important than comfort. I could have stayed on Patricia's couch, safe but diminished. Instead, I chose the uncertainty of building something of my own. It was harder, but infinitely more rewarding. People sometimes ask me if I have regrets. Of course I do. I wish I had been more careful with my money after Robert died. I wish I had sought advice before investing everything. I wish I could go back in time and protect myself from this devastating loss. But regret doesn't build the future. And surprisingly, there are things I gained through this experience that I never would have discovered otherwise. I discovered a strength within myself that I didn't know existed. I discovered that I am capable of rebuilding, of adapting, of thriving in circumstances that I thought would destroy me. I also discovered empathy in a deeper way. When you lose everything, when you are truly vulnerable, you understand the suffering of others in a visceral way. Now, when I see someone homeless on the street, I don't see a stranger. I see someone who could be me, who almost was me. My plans for the future are simple. I want to continue working as long as my body allows. I want to expand our support group at the shelter. I'm even thinking of writing a short guide, starting over after 70, sharing practical resources and encouragement for others in my situation. Linda jokes that I'll work at the coffee shop until I'm 100. "You're going to bury me, Maggie," she laughs. And maybe she's right. I've discovered that having something to wake up to every morning, a place where I'm needed and valued, is the best remedy for longevity. If there's one thing I want people to understand from my story, it's this. The end of a life isn't the end of your life. It sounds obvious when said like that, but when you're in the midst of a crisis, when you've lost everything you thought defined you, it's easy to forget. At 72, I could have given up. No one would have blamed me. Society had already discarded me in many ways, assuming my productive life was over. But I refused to accept that verdict.